right. Good. Well, here we are with another podcast, and thanks for watching, church. We're going to interview a couple of our newest staff members today, and so we have Michael Porter and Justin Willis with us, and this is brought to you by Sequoia National Park and Windsor Christian Academy. Those are our sponsors today, and anyway, so we're going to get into this. Real quick, I felt like we caught two fish with one hook. We threw out a job application through Gospel Coalition, some other platforms, and both these guys applied, but both of them had some different desires and what you guys wanted to do. And so Justin is in seminary right now and still wants to do that full time. He's looking for a part-time job. We were looking for a part-time children's director, and that really fit within his wheelhouse and what he wanted to do, and really helped us too. So that was awesome. And then Michael was pastoring down at a church in San Francisco, and so he decided to take this position up here as well. So it's awesome bringing both you guys on. Justin started a little bit before Michael, but both of them are on board, and here we go. So this podcast is really to help our church family get to know these guys. It'd be fun to do this like in a service, but this is a better format to get to know you guys a little better, hear your testimonies, your stories, learn about your wife a little bit, Michael, Justin's fiance Tira, and talk about church a little bit, and especially in the days we're living in with the COVID, just talk about some of the struggles and how we're working through that. So this will just be a start of this. We might do another one to kind of see how this goes today. So let's start with you, Michael. Welcome, and tell us a little bit about your testimony and God's leading to become a pastor.
Yeah, so starting with my testimony, just kind of a shortened version of it. I was born and raised in a non-Christian family. My father was a very blatant atheist. My mother she would claim to be a Catholic, but very just nominal. Clearly no lived out faith at all in my household. So I grew up never going to church, never hearing the gospel, never knowing anything about Christianity, apart from what, pop culture tells us about Christianity. And so that was my upbringing, but beyond that, my father struggled with alcoholism, and he really, with that, was in and out of work my whole childhood. So we grew up until about junior high, leading into high school years. We grew up kind of a bit of a roller coaster financially as well too. So I grew up in Southern California, about 2 hours east of San Diego, a small town called Brawley, and so that was kind of my childhood. Again, no church, no gospel, no anything, no exposure to the Bible at all. Coming to high school, a series of events happened. My father ended up sobering up. He got a good job. My mom ended up becoming a nurse. And so financially and everything turned around in a real positive way for the first few years of going into high school. But nevertheless, I always tell people this was me at my darkest, because now I was a teenager. I now had the means to kind of not be wild, but just things were comfortable. And so I wasn't, on the spectrum of things, I wasn't extremely wild, but I also wasn't a good kid either. My grades were really bad. I was involved in the party scene a lot, and so that sort of thing, kind of in the middle of all of that. But again, no exposure to Christianity, no exposure to the Bible. And above all else, I didn't have any desire to pursue Christianity at all. I was just kind of doing my own thing. Mm-hmm. Things got worse for myself socially. I started to kind of just push a lot of people away for various reasons. And then my dad ended up relapsing. So this all kind of happened at the same time. My dad relapsed. He lost his job. That eventually led to my mom losing her job. So we basically lost everything within a matter of months. And I found myself living with a friend. So age 16, 17, I was pretty much on my own. But it was at that time where God began to then draw me to Christ. And so lead me to the gospel and so on. And so I went to school. I was ditching a lot at that time, but I happened to go to school that day. A guy who I knew of, but we weren't friends, he ran up to me. He said, "Hey, I'm trying to start a band. I heard you were in bands. Do you want to join this band with me?" Had nothing else going on, so I said, "Okay, sure, I'll do that." And joined this band. The band crashed and burned after like 2 practices, which is typical of most high school bands. But he was a Christian. Pretty much everyone was Christian in that band. They were trying to form a little Christian metal
What kind of band was it?
It was a metal band. And I did the vocals, and I say vocals, not singing, because
It's yelling, right?
you sound like Cookie Monster to the microphone, and that's pretty much what I did. So I was really good at doing the Cookie Monster voice. But band went nowhere, but I became friends with this guy. He was the drummer. And I eventually went to church with him, and it was that Sunday. The sermon that was preached was on the matter of sanctification. And it just got me thinking, you know what this preacher is describing is a real change that happens when someone becomes a Christian. He was describing something that, a transformation that happened. Mm-hmm. And it just got me thinking, as an unbeliever, as an unregenerate person, realizing, okay, maybe I don't know what Christianity actually is. And what he's describing sounds good. It sounds like something that I want. Mm-hmm. But I didn't, that was the extent of it. Just the interest was there. Well, the sermon finished. I was thinking about all of this in the youth kids, because again, I'm in high school at this time. So all the high schoolers are just extra hyper. I don't know what's going on. They're kind of flocking around the youth guy at the time. Turns out they were going to a Christian camp the next day. So this was Sunday, early Monday morning, they were going to this camp. Mm-hmm. They had some final instruction about that, and that was it. So my friend dropped me off. I wasn't going. I didn't have a ticket or anything. That was that. So I go home. Later that evening, I get a phone call. And my friend says, "Hey, one of our guys got sick. We already purchased the ticket. If you want to go, you can come with us. Just pack your bags. I'll pick you up in the morning." Mm-hmm. And again, in hindsight, it was clearly the Lord calling me to himself. And without much thought, I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll go." Because again, the sermon was it softened my heart clearly. And I just felt like I needed to go. And so I went to this camp. And long story short, I just heard a very simple gospel message out of the book of Colossians. And it was the third night of that little sermon series that, I just completely broke down. Heard the gospel for the first time at this camp. And, just broke down weeping, and everyone around me was kind of confused because I was clearly the non-Christian kid at that camp. I kept, curse words kept slipping and so on. But just broke down weeping. The sermon ended, and they had these big wooden crosses at the front of the stage. And I don't remember if there was any invitation to go down there, but I just bolted down there. I fell at the bottom of this cross, and I just couldn't stop crying. I don't know. I know what happened now, but at the time, it's just that transformation happened. It was a real dramatic conversion that happened. And I always tell people I've been stuck this way ever since. Mm-hmm. It was a literal. We throw around the language of born again Christian. Mm-hmm. In my experience, it literally was that. I was a completely different person. My outlook on everything was completely different. Mm-hmm. And people noticed the change right away. And so when I got back from that camp, a lot of people just thought it was a phase. Like, oh, great. Like, he's going through a lot. You know what I mean? They try they try to analyze it. Yeah. He's going through a lot. Clearly, this is just a phase, a security blanket, whatever. But here I am, serving in pastoral ministry. So it's clearly not a phase. I've been walking with the Lord by His grace and just His perseverance very closely since I came to faith. That was in 2006, July 12th, 2006. And I've just been following the Lord ever since, and feel a calling on my life for ministry, and so now I'm here.
All right, awesome.
Yeah,
great. Justin, over to you. A little bit about your testimony.
Mine's going to be radically different in that I grew up in a very Christian family. My dad was a music pastor over at Santa Rosa Bible, and my mom was the piano player at that church. So I grew up in a nice Christian home, and the way I was saved was very simply. My mom was celebrating my brother's 2-year anniversary to having been saved. My brother was 2 years older than me, and he had gotten saved 2 years to the day, and we were in bunk beds. And my mom was talking to my older brother about how 2 years previously he had been saved, and she explained it all, and here I am in the bottom bunk listening to that. And when she finished, I leaned over to her and said, like, hey, I would like to be saved too. And she walked me through that. So my testimony is a simple, saved by grace through faith at the age of 4, coming to an understanding that Jesus was my Savior, and that even at that young age, I was a sinner who needed him. And that's kind of my testimony. I can kind of keep going through my Christian life after that. For most of...
How old were you when you accepted Christ?
Accepted Christ. I would have been 4.
4.
I would have been 4 or 5, I believe.
And you remember it?
And I remember it, yeah. I vividly remember that day, yeah.
You remember anything before that in your life?
Not really. I've got a terrible memory.
Okay,
I've got bits and pieces of grandparents and things like that, but I can vividly remember that day.
Okay.
And there were several instances, as with a lot of little kids, you come to an understanding that Jesus saved you, but there were several times, I remember it at Awana 2 or 3 years later, I did another call to action, stood up, raised my hand, and said, like, hey, I just want to make sure he's really there. So there were plenty of instances where I just tried to reaffirm that faith. But that is the first instance where I truly believe I accepted Jesus as my Savior at a very young age. And kind of stuck with that through most of elementary, had that childlike faith. And it wasn't until about, I think, 6th grade where that faith became more not just a faith that my parents had been guiding me through, but a faith of my own. I was at a summer camp, much like how Michael was later in life. I was at a summer camp where you're out there for an entire week. You're learning about the Bible kind of very intensively. And I remember raising my hand near the end of the week that, I think this is what I want to do for a career. This is what I want to do full time. And ever since that was 6th grade, so how old is a 6th grader? Age 12. Ever since kind of age 12, I've always known I wanted to also follow in my father's footsteps and kind of be in the pastoral ministry. Yeah. So that's what I've been pursuing ever since then.
So I knew Justin because I worked with Justin's dad, Stan, at San Jose Bible Church for a few years before coming up to Windsor. And I think you were 9 years old, I think, right when I left.
Young.
So sad. Anyway, your parents, so if I remember your parents' testimony, they were more saved out of like the world. Your dad...
all 4 of my grandparents are Christian.
Okay,
I think my dad grew up in a Christian household, but neither his parents were super taught the Bible in their home. Okay. And so my dad accepted Christ more in the junior high age, kind of as growing up in a Christian home. Once it became real to him, it was closer to junior high. And then my mom accepted Christ at a very young age with her Christian parents.
Yeah. Awesome. So. Kind of like Timothy, right? Got saved younger from his mom and grandma, and yeah. Cool. That's awesome. Okay, let's get to know your significant others right now. Okay, so Michael's married to Takana. I hear you refer to as Taka.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's easier to say.
Yeah. So why don't you share a little bit about your marriage and how you got to know and meet Takana? Kind of interesting story there, and just a little bit about your girls.
Yeah. So married. My wife is Takana. We have 2 girls, so Elsie and Florence. Elsie turns 4 in February. Okay. Which I'm in denial about because it's going way too fast.
Yeah.
And then Florence is about 1.5, over 1.5. My wife and I, we go way back, surprisingly. So we've been married over 4 years. But we met back in 2008, 8 or 9. So we're well over 10 years knowing each other. We had a mutual friend. So at that time I was doing undergrad. At that time I was in LA. We had a mutual friend. We met and we just kept in touch. She's born and raised Tokyo, Japan. And so, again, our paths crossed. We exchanged contact information, and that was that. And so we chatted. I'm dating myself. We kept in touch through MySpace, which is, Justin, you probably don't even know what that is. We kept in touch through MySpace, which was before the Facebook era.
Yeah.
And we were just friends for a long time, and nothing more than that. And it was in 2011.
Was she living in Tokyo?
Yeah. So she's back in Tokyo.
But she spoke English. Okay.
Yeah. So she did some exchange studies in England and in Australia. So that's where. So she actually. So she already knew English.
Okay.
So she was taught British English. So there were some different, she was taught proper English. And so, but yeah, so we just friends for a long time. Spring 2011, the big earthquake tsunami happened in Japan, and she went completely off the grid for a couple days because she was in Tokyo. So the earthquake happened and the tsunami hit, as we all remember, and that was mostly in the northern area of Japan, but it also impacted Tokyo quite a bit. And so she went off the grid, and I wasn't able to get in touch with her at all. So I saw it on the news. I didn't know how she was doing. I didn't know if she was okay. And it just made me realize, like, I'm a lot more bothered by this. You know what I mean? If it was just a casual pen pal, I'd be concerned, but not this concerned.
Right.
But I was really, really, really anxious about it. So I finally got in touch with her. She was okay. And again, it got me thinking, maybe I do actually care about her, beyond just friendship. So I told her that, and then she just didn't contact me for like a month. She probably thought I was a creep or something. And I was like, hey, I don't even know how I worded it.
Different form of tsunami.
Yeah. And so she finally got back to me, and she said I had some time to process that, and we'll see what happens. And so, long story short, she would come. We started dating. It was long distance. I was working as an audio engineer at the time. She would just come down every few months and visit. The Lord just maintained our relationship. I mean, long distance relationships are very hard on couples, but it worked well for us. I mean, we were both very busy, and it forced us to communicate, and to get to know each other a lot. And then we ended up getting engaged. It was a longer engagement because of just the immigration process of just visas, fiancé visa, adjustment of status, all of that. But we went through all the loopholes, and now we've been married 4 years. So.
And how did she get to know Christ?
Yeah.
If you can share that.
No, I can. So my wife is a believer. No, that's a good question. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Maybe Justin should do the podcast.
Sorry. I'm curious. I don't actually know this answer.
No, that's a good question. So because as many of us know, Japan is one of the least reached. So like it's a very developed country, and yet I think it's less than 1% are evangelical Christian. And within that 1%, I think there's over 300 denominations represented. So it's a very small amount, and then within that small percentage, they're very fractured. They're not communicating with each other. And so that said, there just happened to be a house church around the block from my in-laws' house. And so I've seen it, actually. It's just a little house that they renovated the first floor of to be a church. So the pastor lives there. Mostly older folk go there. It's like less than 10 people. But my wife, when she was a kid, had a friend who their family would go there. And so her friend invited her to go to that church. So she knew the church was there. That friend ended up moving, and then she just never went back. Well, my wife went through some various trials in high school, and she just remembered that church. And so she would go to that church just for prayer, not really knowing much about what she was praying about or who or whatever, but she would just go. And it was through that connection that she heard the gospel and she came to faith. I believe it was later in high school, as a high school student, so probably 17, 18 or so. She came to faith. And it's tough being a Christian in Japan, but again, the Lord persevered her faith throughout all of that. We connected. Even the friend that mutual friend that we had was a worship leader. And so even how we got in contact with each other was through the church. And so that's how she came to faith.
Okay. Awesome. And Tira, let's go with your fiance.
Gosh, I will readily admit I am nervous. I have never told my fiance story because we're still a little new at this. So this is going to be an adventure. Hopefully I should preemptively apologize to you, Tira, in case I get into the details wrong.
Just make stuff up.
Yeah, make stuff up. How we met, we ended up meeting at the church I was previously working for, a New Vintage Church, in a Bible study that she had come to, and we dated shortly afterwards. What kind of details do you want me to fill in here?
Okay, I can ask more questions. So you're at a Bible study.
At Bible study.
And you see this cute girl named Tira, and you're like, I think Did you ask her out?
Yeah, you know, we hit it off. I need somebody that's got a thick skin and a good sense of humor, because the way I flirt is by making fun of somebody, and she handled that real well. So that's how we met, and just kind of a love of the Bible. Tira's story, just for kind of context, Tira grew up in a Christian home, had the way she describes it is a good Christian faith, and was very invested in kind of that Christian culture. But around in high school, I think she started to really fall away from that. Had grown up in this environment where she knew a lot of things, but didn't necessarily believe fully in the Bible, and just had a big rebellious streak, as she describes it. And let me see if I'm going to try my best to get all these details right. She ended up having some serious problems with alcohol. Pretty big alcohol abuse after high school for several years, which thankfully the Lord kind of protected her from. And she, all the while, believes firmly she was saved. She doesn't have like an exact instance for when she got saved. But after struggling with alcohol for many years, she ended up hearing God's voice, is how she describes it. The only time she's ever really heard God's voice, and it was the last time she ever drank, was that day that she kind of heard that. So thankfully, we ended up meeting shortly after she got out of this. What was described to me, she actually, when she was first coming to my Bible study, my mentor, the senior pastor's wife, said, "Hey, this girl, Tira Ingalls, is going to be coming to this Bible study. You should date her. She doesn't have any friends." Which was very depressing, and I immediately thought, I'm not going to date some girl that's got no friends. That's terrible. But she comes, and she's got this great personality, but very clearly still, even with God, is kind of looking for more community in that. And when we got to meet, I'm so thankful, because she had already truly kind of embraced Christianity and embraced Christ. So it's not like when we started dating, I was some sort of savior figure who led her to God. But it was also a huge growing moment when she did start dating me, and I was in seminary at the time, very invested. Her faith also got to grow exponentially kind of through that, and seeing what a good Christian man looks like. So that's the short of it. I hope those details made sense.
How long did you date till you got engaged?
We had been dating just under a year when we got engaged. And we had known each other a little over a year after at that point.
Yeah, all right. I didn't know when I should ask Jill to marry me. And so I asked her, like, how do you know, And the best advice I got, I thought, was you should know her for at least all the seasons of the year. So I said, okay. So I knew Jill through all the seasons. At the end of that point, I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
I asked her. So you're kind of...
Well, and we had, the way we described it was, there are seasons of life where things are stressful, and you need to kind of see how the person you're dating is at during those stressful times. And we ended up going through COVID and her losing a job and backing out of school, but then also finding a job, and then me losing a job, and all this. I can't imagine a more stressful period than the last year for us to see each other at our low points and see how the other person reacts and responds. So I firmly believe if COVID and kind of the stress and trials that came through that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have gotten engaged as quickly as we did. But
yeah, and now
things sped up.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out a wedding venue now.
Yeah,
for
trying
March.
to do all that. So
awesome. So I've really enjoyed getting to know Tira a little bit, and we're having dinner tonight, so it'll be good to get to know her more. It's great, and she loves children's ministry, and so you guys are just like awesome combo, man. It's really cool. Yeah. Let's talk about ministry a little bit. So, Michael, if you want to get us started. What led you into pastoral ministry? What happened?
Yeah.
Why would somebody do something like that?
I don't know. I still ask myself that now.
Right?
So my undergraduate degree is in audio engineering, and I worked as an audio engineer, which is kind of rare, because usually it's one of those degrees where like you get the degree and then you end up working at Starbucks or something.
Okay. Yeah.
At least that was the case for most of my classmates. But I ended up working in that industry. I worked at a studio / record label in West LA, Santa Monica area. And so like, I should have been real satisfied. Like I had a great job. I was making a lot of money. I was in a cool area. There was a lot of young people in that industry, so it should have been fulfilling, and it wasn't. And I think that's what I just wrestled with was, I was working. I never worked an 8-hour shift. It was always way more than that. Leave 7 o'clock in the morning, get back 9, 10 o'clock at night, with traffic mostly because it's LA. But it dawned on me that, the exact thought that I had was what I'm doing has no eternal significance at all. There's no eternal, because it was a secular label, secular stuff. A lot of the people I interacted with were, they knew I was a Christian. But we were just so busy, and we had projects, and we had things, there wasn't a lot of downtime to just chat. And there was a series of months where I just kept bumping into, I'll bump into just a random Christian person, at Safeway or something like that, and just chat. And those were real refreshing, and it just made me want to go back and pursue something Christian. And so that's what I did. I went into my boss's office, of course, with prayer and stuff, but I said, I'm going to quit and I'm going to study something Christian. I didn't know what an MDiv was. I didn't know what seminary was. I'm there has to be something. I didn't do my homework. I probably should have before walking in here. But I'm going to and I just took a leap of faith. It was very random.
Yeah.
But I just felt I'm going to leave. So I left off my savings for a while, and I eventually went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. A lot of people just call it TEDS. And so this was in the suburbs of Chicago. And even when I was at seminary, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I wasn't sure if it was pastoral ministry or if it was academia. And so I was kind of torn between both worlds my entire time there. I was, serving in the church, but then I also was teaching on campus as well, and doing papers and a lot of kind of academic stuff as well. And so I didn't really know where I was going to land on things. And kind of like with the audio engineering stuff, it was my last semester. I had some PhD offers to pursue PhD study. And then I was checking my mail. It was midnight because I was in the library and I needed a break. So I went to go check my mail. And I saw this, just no picture, no logo, anything, just a flyer just posted on the corner of one of our little pin boards. And it was for a pastoral residency in the suburbs of Cleveland, Parkside Church. And Alistair Begg is the pastor of that church. And the church that I was attending, the senior pastor there knew Alistair personally. They had the same mentor. His name is Colin Smith. They both had Derek Prime as their mentor. And so I chatted with him about it as well. They thought it was a good idea, and so I applied. I didn't think I would get it, but I applied. They flew me down. I had a big interview day with them. And then I thought I did terrible. Oh man, I was tired. Elsie was born at that time, so I wasn't sleeping a whole lot. Flew back a couple weeks later. I got a call while I was teaching class, and I stepped outside, and they said, yeah, we want to bring you on board if you want to come. So then I served there, and I ended up really liking it. So when they said, yeah, well, we want to hire you, I said no to the PhD stuff. And then I just kind of took another leap of faith, went to Cleveland. I ended up liking pastoral ministry. And then that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
Nice. That's
just
awesome.
kind of rolling with the punches.
Yeah, it kind of jogs my memory a little bit, because when I was feeling like this was the leading of the Lord to go into ministry, I didn't know what pastors do. I didn't know how they put food on the table. I didn't know how they paid rent. I just felt I think this is the direction the Lord's calling me, and you just kind of walk into that.
Yeah.
And, so yeah, that's awesome. Cool. So Justin comes from a pastor's home, so he kind of knew what he was getting into a little bit.
Yeah,
but,
I had plenty of good
experience?
expectations for what a pastor was like, what the hours are like, kind of how a lot of that works. And I shared already that I think it was a calling at a summer camp that I decided I wanted to go into pastoral ministry. But if I'm honest, looking back at it now, I don't think I fully understood or embraced what I was really getting into until I was into seminary, which doesn't make sense. You'd think you'd go to seminary to embrace that. But I ended up working at a church with a nonprofit degree and was pretty convinced, having a nonprofit degree, working for a church, this is as good as it's going to be. I don't really need a lot of that biblical background, pursuing the role of like a specific pastor, that's not for me. I don't really need that. But working for a church, I really realized that where I felt called to be was with the Bible, teaching the Bible, and in that kind of education process. And I signed up for seminary and was just taking these classes where you're going over things like leadership or what is the role of the pastor. And it was in those classes that really kind of convinced me and convicted me of that my occupation wasn't just going to be as simple as work for a church or work for a Christian nonprofit, which was kind of what I wanted to do at the time. It was, no, I really want to be a pastor that is teaching and proclaiming the word, as kind of 2 Timothy says. So,
Awesome. Yeah. Good. Let's talk about just some stuff outside of ministry. So, Michael, what do you enjoy doing outside of church? What are some of your ambitions or fun things you like to do?
It's always hard to answer this one because I have young kids and they take up, in a very good way, not in a negative way, but they do take up a lot of my time.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm real close with my family.
Yeah.
So like all my off days, it's usually like Target runs with the family or, taking Elsie and Florence out or something like that. So I'm kind of a family man right now, primarily.
Yeah. Good.
And as for like, which is the right answer.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I've been skateboarding since I was like single digit age. Like I've always done that. And so I do enjoy skating. And yeah, I mean, that's about it. I've dabbled in a lot of things. So I'm hesitant to say anything. And then someone watching is going to be like, oh, really?
Yeah.
But like I've dabbled like in music, like drums and bass and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I did jiu-jitsu for a little while, and that was fun early on in college.
Okay.
And so, but again, a lot of those kind of things are real. They take a lot of time. I don't have a lot of time to pursue those.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Ideally, once the girl's a little bit older, I'd like to get back into those too more regularly.
Yeah.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. All right. Justin?
I'm like a ginormous movie buff.
Okay.
I watch a lot of movies, and I'm at the point where I feel like I know film directors better than I know my theologians. So I'm trying very hard to readjust this. So to say I'm the movie guy I used to be is a bit of a lie, but I still do. I watch a lot. In college, I have reviews for every movie I've ever written seen for the past like 6 years. So I write extensively on movies, and there was a point.
Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
There was a
Where
point.
do we find the reviews?
Please don't look at this up. There was a point in college where I watched, I think, 417 movies in a single year. So I was
Siskel and Ebert and Justin Willis.
Yeah, I've gotten myself an informal education on like film theory and a lot of that stuff. So I can talk your ear off about pretentious Japanese, older like 60s Japanese films. I can do that.
Wow. All right.
That's my very strange hobby.
We'll talk about that at dinner tonight. Maybe Takana can fill you in on some Japanese movie.
She probably knows more than we do.
So.
All right. So hobbies, and just you like watching movies.
I watch a lot.
What's your favorite movie?
It's a Persian film, so it's from Iran, called A Separation. It's really good. You can look that one up. That's a good movie. 2011, I believe.
Wow. What's your favorite movie?
Probably Rocky or something like
Rocky. It's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so fun watching those movies again with my kids. Man, we just have a great time. Yeah.
Yeah, I like all of them.
E.T.
Which one was the bad one? I think it was
Back to the
5.
Future.
Rocky 5 was horrible. Was that the street fight one?
Yeah.
So bad.
I think there's a Rocky 6 that's actually even worse than Rocky 5. Yeah.
Rocky 4. I have a sweet spot for Rocky 4.
Oh,
that one's...
Ivan Drago? Kidding me? That's awesome. Yeah.
That's a good one.
Very inspiring. All right.
I'll read your review on it later.
Do you have reviews on Rocky?
I've only ever seen the first one because the other ones are considered bad, so you don't go back and like look at the film history of the bad movies.
So good.
Yeah, 1 through 4 is
You just watch the good ones.
Yeah. So let's talk about how the Lord led you guys to First Baptist Church of Windsor. Okay, so you guys have had this journey, and here you are. So, Michael, you want to get us started with how the Lord led you here?
No, good question. So we're at Parkside in the suburbs of Cleveland. we actually had the option to stay, and we just felt like just a deep sense of no, this isn't. It wasn't a matter if it was a good fit. It was a great church. We really got along with everyone there, but it just didn't feel right. And so we said no, and then we started just the job hunt. And so I applied to a bunch of places along the West Coast, because my family's on the West Coast, and then obviously Takana's family's in Japan, so it's travel-wise, it's just a lot easier to be on the West Coast than in the Midwest. So applied to a bunch of places. I ended up at a church in the city in San Francisco as an associate pastor there. And I was there for a year and a couple months. And for various reasons, it just wasn't a good fit. And so we prayed a lot about it. And I began to, it was totally the Lord. When I put Florence to bed, I would just kind of thumb through the Gospel Coalition's job board. And just casually just see what's out there. And then COVID hit and no one was hiring. So I'm like, okay, it went from like literally hundreds of jobs to like a few dozen. And well, this one popped up. And so we were already thinking about leaving our current church. And leadership even there kind of knew we were on our way out, so it wasn't a secret. And then I saw this church, First Baptist Church of Windsor. And I said, well, where's Windsor at? So I Googled it because I didn't know where it was. I'm like, oh, wait, it's like an hour, 30 minutes away from us. It's not that far. And so then we just looked into the church. We listened to a bunch of your sermons, me and Takana, and we thought, this could be a good fit. So we applied, and now we're here. So just the Lord led us here.
Michael's a big Alistair Begg fan. Yeah, worked with him, for him.
Yeah.
And I'm a big Alistair Begg fan too. Yeah. So probably like, hey, I heard that before from Alistair Begg. Anyway, so yeah, it's good fit that way too. Yeah. It's cool. All right, how about you, Justin?
How did I end up here?
Yeah.
I had been at a different church in Santa Rosa for 3 years. And the way that God kind of led me there was...
Yeah, tell the story about how you started there and kind of the evolution there of your ministry.
In college, I watched 400 movies instead of doing internships or really plugging myself into a church. So I graduated with no one looking to hire me at all. So I was jobless for 6 months, just a low-life piece of bum.
Yeah. So on your app, when you filled out a resume and you put down you've watched 400 movies.
Yeah, surprisingly, churches don't look at that and go, we got to hire this guy.
Well-rounded.
But yeah, so no, I knew I wanted to work for a church like I had described, but I didn't care in what capacity. So I was just applying for kind of any sort of Christian nonprofit or church and just was getting nothing back because my resume was just terrible. But the only church that gave me an interview was New Vintage Church in Santa Rosa. And they didn't give me a second interview, but I ended up calling them hey, I've been jobless for 6 months. I really need this job. Will you take me? And they had already hired a guy. Very similar to this situation, surprisingly, because I think you had already been hired when I was applying with Lance.
You were right on the cusp.
Yeah, right on the cusp, yeah. So they had already hired a guy, but they were like, well, we'll fill you in some capacity. So they filled me in as a social media guy for 5 hours, but quickly realized, this guy's got energy, he's got drive, but this is not his talent. And so I ended up switching into children's ministry and really had the opportunity to flourish there for several years. But as I got to kind of see the importance or the role of kind of what a pastor is and kind of the way that a church, I believe, biblically should be run, I ended up not aligning so much with the church that I was at. And
so the seminary, the philosophy of the seminary was different than the church philosophy you were
at. My seminary was teaching us just straight out of the Bible, here's how churches should be run. And it kind of came to the point where there for a while I thought I was just getting a balanced education of a very conservative seminary with a more liberal church, and I was able to just slide through the middle. And so I think I did that for about 3 years, and there came to a point where what I was being taught and what I was actually doing at the church were in such conflict that I couldn't in good conscience continue to just ride that line. I had to pick a side to some extent. And I ended up I ended up completely aligning with what I was being taught at the seminary about what it means to be a leader, what it means to be a pastor, how you're supposed to teach the Bible, just verse by verse and those kind of things. So I ended up really aligning with that and decided it was time I step away from that church. So I took a big leap of faith and quit, not having any sort of job lined up. I think I had quit for 2 weeks when I saw the application for the associate pastor, which was 40 hours a week. It's not what I wanted, because I still wanted, seminary was super important at this time. Like, I feel like I was learning, I was growing, so I really wanted to stay at seminary. So I came to you and told you, like, hey, you've got this job, it's 40 hours. I don't want that. I need something that I can still do seminary with. And you know, hooked me up with the children's ministry, which is part-time, much better, much more fit.
I was so happy that day. I was so happy that we met, and man, God bless that whole thing. So, how about like when you were at New Vintage, which is kind of a oxy, it's new, old. Anyway, so New Vintage, you started 5 hours a week doing their social media, but then talk about kind of how you evolved there at New Vintage.
There was a wonderful lady who recognized quickly that, this wasn't my skill, this wasn't my talent, but we could really, this guy, he is talented, and he does have some sort of drive, so let's throw him somewhere else and see if he can flourish. And she at the time had been doing kind of guest services, which is just helping out with the people that greet at the front, and also children's, which are two very conflicting ministries, and she wanted to step away from children's, and she just offered me the ability to run their children's large group program, which basically meant we played a little game with the kids, we taught them a story, and we sang songs. And it was about a 30-minute little thing. But I ended up doing that part-time for 2 years and really got to prove myself to these people. And then when the senior pastor left, his wife, who was running the other side of children's, more the small group, when they left, I got to fill that role. So I was actually full-time just doing children's ministry, all of their K through 5th grade program. And they had about 60 kids on a given Sunday. So it was fun. It was, you got to do that.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome. That's neat to kind of hear how you evolved in that at that church and how God's led in your life. Good. So let's talk about church a little bit, kind of the days we're living in, and let's talk about Michael. You're about 30 years old. Yeah, 31. From a 31-year-old perspective, what do you just see like are some of the needs of the church, or if you could see the church kind of grow, maybe there's some weaknesses that the church, it could be our church in particular, but church in general, what are some things you see could improve and grow in and be more the way God's designed the church to be?
I think, and this is going to sound obvious, but I can't stress this point enough, is, just keeping the Bible central in the life of the church. And of course, most people hearing that will like, well, of course it's Christian, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
but you'd be surprised at how many, even not here, and I truly mean that, not here, but how many pastors that I've come across that would read a verse and then just go on their own rabbit trail about whatever, what they think about the verse or how they think this applies. And I think the goal of preaching and teaching ministry in the church needs to simply be just communicate what the scriptures are saying and have faith in the power of God's word to actually change people's hearts. Because the power is in the scriptures. It's not, we don't, it's not out of our own savvy. It's not out of our own
creativity.
You know what I mean? Creativity or ability. The
power.
power.
Scary if it was.
Yeah. And just in my experience, like the preachers that I respect the most are those that are really not that flashy.
Yeah.
They're just simply communicating what the text says.
Yeah.
The trick is sometimes the text says things that are very hard. And the pastor needs to just be faithful to what the text says, even when it's hard, even whenever it may offend, especially as pastors, you get to know people, you start to know issues or you know what I mean? Things like that. You come across a text that addresses that. That's when the rubber meets the road, where, are you going to be faithful to what the text says and just proclaim it and just simply be a mouthpiece for the scriptures? I feel like pastors that do that faithfully and boldly, I think that's a game changer for ministry because, in my experience, even at my past church, there was just a lot of sugarcoating in the preaching and the teaching that was there. And then maybe it's just because I'm young as well too. When I would preach or teach, I would do just exactly that. I'm not being cute. I'm not trying to, I'm just saying what the text says, even when it's hard. And I'd have people that would say, that really challenged me. Thank you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people grew to, it's, it pushed some people away. Some people get offended, but that's not my job. My job is not to people please everyone and to,
Right.
my job is simply to shepherd God's flock with the word primarily. And so I think the greatest need, at least in my immediate experience, especially here in California, because in the Midwest, biblical churches are almost on every corner. It's but especially in Northern California and just this area as a whole, we're so afraid to offend anybody. We're so afraid to just speak the truth. We're so afraid to just proclaim truth and to just be bold and say, no, that the Bible is true. God is there.
Yeah.
And there is good news in this fallen and broken world. Let me tell you about it and just say what the Bible says. It's so simple, but the simple, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
And I think pastors really need to just double down on just what does the scripture say, communicate that clearly. And that's where, of course, preaching and technique does play a role, because we do have to present it in a way that's digestible.
Yeah.
Especially nowadays with COVID when things are online and that sort of thing. But just say what the text says and get out of the way and let God speak. We're just a mouthpiece for the word. And so I think keeping the Bible center in every ministry, whether it's children's ministry, whether it's hospitality, whatever it might be, keeping the word center and creating a culture that values the word and has reverence towards the word and always goes back to that. I feel like that's the greatest need.
All right. Great. Thanks.
Well, I hate to just steal Michael's answer, but I'm going to double down on that exact answer and say the same thing would be. The question was, what are you excited about, or what do you?
Yeah, just because you're 26.
26.
Yeah. So, from a 26-year-old perspective, what do you see? Like, man, here's where the church kind of missed the boat, and here's where we could do a better job. I think a lot of people are actually interested in millennial thinking too, of how a millennial would approach truth and objective truth and. So do you want to just...
Yeah, well, I just doubling down on, I think, what millennials, I think what everyone needs is the Bible.
Okay.
Just as Michael said, and the role of the church is not to take the Bible and then jump it off to teach what they want to teach. It's to take the Bible and study it so that you can learn the intent of the authors and the intent of God in these Bibles, that you are not teaching your own worldly wisdom, but you are teaching the wisdom that is found within the scriptures that God inspired. Just because, and making that understandable to an audience where the Bible is, it's something that we're teaching these children, these youth, to go back to as the source of truth, as something that is exciting and living and fun, yet where they should be rooted in. It's super important, and that's where my emphasis would be, and what I know people need is that Bible and the truth that's found in it of Jesus and the salvation. I think the more I get to know young people, the more I cynically believe a lot of them, even those that go to church, have a good understanding of maybe even some of the facts that are in the Bible, but they don't have a good understanding of how the Bible is living and how it is a saving work, and Jesus' life is a saving work, and not just some facts or some laws that they need to abide by.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I've really just reduced my thinking in ministry in regards to church, in that I just want to be around real Christians who love God's word and fellowship. And if that means I'm in a church of 10 people, I'm in a church of 10 people. If I'm in a church of 1,000 people, 1,000 people. It doesn't really matter to me. I just want to be around that genuine Christian. And I think that's what we're trying to do here at the church, is just try to make disciples of followers of Christ, and not worrying so much about generational, what they're thinking is more of just giving the truth, because the Bible's transcended all these generations, so that's good.
Yeah, the Spirit of God is in the Bible, and the Spirit will move regardless of age in people. And I think just in reinforcing in every generation that this is true and it's living, and it's not like other books. It will impact you if you pick it up and read it. It has power.
Yeah. I like not A.W. Pink. Arthur Pink. Maybe it is A.W. Pink. Pink's quote that I gave on Sunday, "The Bible is not a lazy man's book."
Yeah.
It's really good. Let's talk about, we'll finish up with this question, and that is, Michael, you're focusing right now as associate pastor, you're focusing on our youth ministry. We have junior high group, high school group. You're entering into a ministry that's already got about 50 kids involved, right? And so that was different from San Francisco. But as you're getting to know our church and seeing, here's some ways, man, we need God's help with everything, right? But in particular, ways the church can pray for you, pray for the youth ministry, some challenges you see. If you knew there was going to be 200 people from church watching this and they could be praying for you about things, what would you ask for?
Yeah. I think just pray for softened hearts among the youth, that they are receptive to the word, but also receptive to just myself as well. I hope to get to know each student and be a pastor to them and be a support person for them. So I guess just pray. Now, I haven't experienced that a whole lot, though. The youth here are very warm. They're very friendly, very welcoming. And so pray, for, me to build better relationships with all of our students, and also just that they are truly receiving the word. So yeah, that would be the prayer that I would ask for.
Yeah. And then
also,
some leadership.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say too. And then also just pray for us as a leadership team. Because my approach to youth ministry is it has to be done as a team. It can't be a one-man army. And so I've been really blessed with a very solid team. They know who they are. And just pray that we come together, that we're unified, and that my team members are also growing in their understanding of the word and so on too. Because I want to be able to build into them and to be able to equip my leaders as well. Yeah. Because, we're to proclaim the word. We're also to, equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so to mobilize, to equip students to be able to do ministry, to equip, our young adults and that sort of thing too. So that's what I would like to see too. More multiplication in that sense.
Yep. All right. Good. How about you, Justin, with children's ministry? What are just some prayer requests for that ministry that you're seeing and some areas we could just grow in?
I think what Michael said it was great, just for open hearts for these kids. I was saved at a very young age, and I recognize that these kids, even with their childlike faith, can truly make a life-changing decision that will alter the course of their history if they can accept Christ at a young age. And I think just having those softened hearts would be great. But then also for these leaders, even more so than youth ministry, children's ministry is reliant on a giant team of rotating leaders who aren't doing it out of obligation, but are doing it because they are excited to be teaching the Bible to kids. As somebody that grew up in church, I just know how impactful and important it is to have these leaders that are on fire for us, on fire for children, but are also on fire for God. And that perfect mixture and blend is something that I pray we can instill in every leader here.
Yeah. So. And just to kind of piggyback on that for our church family, when I needed to become more of the children's leader for a little bit and help oversee Awana, getting in there and teaching, 5, 6, 7-year-olds the Bible was such a good experience. And man, you could be having just a bad day and you go up and you just spend some time with some 6 and 7-year-olds. Like, it was awesome, So I think if people could understand just the blessing that's there, it's super cool. And then with jumping in, leading the youth group, with through that downtime, just being in there with the junior hires and high schoolers, just and they're curious about life, and there's so many things thrown at them right now, to be able to be some kind of stable person in their life and give them truth. And you guys will especially Michael not growing up in a Christian home, how important, that is at that age. So a lot of neat opportunities to serve and be a part of these ministries and be a blessing to people. So I think about this COVID, kind of this downturn right now, this kind of weird time of life. It also gives us a time, I feel like, if we thought of like a storm where we're inside and we're just preparing because the storm's going to pass, and so we want to be ready once this passes to have a church that's really able to minister to people and get the gospel out. So right now we're using a lot of our time preparing and getting things ready, but doing the best we can. There are opportunities to still serve people. We have children's church, we have youth ministry, so we're still going, So, all right. Well, thanks guys for doing this, and hopefully this is helpful for the church, and I know it's a good time being with you. Thanks.